the console, we're going to get an error because this log function doesn't actually exist in this file. This file doesn't know about the log function. Of course, back in main, here it is. The log function exists fine, and we can actually replace our hello world logging to use that log function. And if I try and compile my program by hitting Ctrl F7, you'll see that it works fine and we don't get any errors. However, back in log, if I try and compile this, we get an error. Because of course, as far as this file is concerned, log doesn't exist. So our code here, I need to simply declare that log does exist. If we go back to main and we take a look at this actual signature, you'll see that log is a function that returns void and takes in one parameter, which is our IntelliSense error has gone away, and if I hit Ctrl F7, we do compile. And if I right click on hello world and click build to actually build my program, you can see that it links fine as well. Header file. I'm going to right click on header files. Now note, these folders here are called filters. They're not actual real folders. I can create a header file under source files. There's going to be a few videos on how Visual Studio works in the future, but for now just know that these are kind of fake folders. It doesn't matter which one you right click on to create your header file. I'm going to create it under header files because that makes sense, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to make a header file called log.h. You'll notice that it's straight away inserted some code for me automatically that says #pragma_once. We'll talk about that in just a second. So here I'm going to put in my declaration. I'm going to cut my declaration from the log.cpp file and put it into here, into my header cpp. You can see we get an error now because we're not actually declaring that function. However, if I type in #include log.h, check that out. We don't get an error and our file compiles. Fantastic. What we can also do is actually include it into main.cpp. Now main.cpp contains the actual definition for the function, so it doesn't really require it. We can call log anyway, but just so you know, it's not going to hurt for us to actually include log.h into here and compile. That's not going to be a problem. Alright, so back in log.cpp, you can see we've defined this fantastic function called initlog. However, no one actually knows about it except for log.cpp. If I want to be able to call it from main, I'm going to need that declaration. If I call initlog over here, it's going to give me an error because that's not declared anywhere. So let's go ahead and add that function signature initlog into our log header file. Just like that. Fantastic. Make sure that it matches the function signature that you've actually declared in your CPP file. So now everything seems well in the world. I'm also going to go ahead and cut and paste this log definition into my log file because that makes a lot more sense. Now I get an error here telling me cout is not found. That's okay. I can just include IOStream. Awesome. So back in main, if I run my program, we can see that we managed to initialize our log and then log hello world to the console. So here we have a statement that Visual Studio has seemingly inserted for us called #pragma_once. What is this? So firstly, anything that begins with a hash is known as a preprocessor command or a preprocessor directive. It means that this is going to be evaluated by the C++ preprocessor before this file actually gets compiled. Pragma is essentially an instruction that is sent to the compiler or to the preprocessor. And what pragma_once essentially means is that only include this file once. If I create a struct here called player, I can leave it empty, it doesn't really matter. If I were to include this file twice into a single translation unit with no header guards, it would actually include that file twice, which means that I would have two structures with exactly the same name, player. We can take a look at this example by commenting out our pragma_once, and then back in log, I will include log.h twice. If I try and compile my file, you can see that we get a player struct redefinition error because we're redefining that struct player. We can only define one struct called player. Structs need you create another header file here called common. Common is just going to contain some common includes. For example, it will include log. If I go to log.h and make sure that pragma_once is commented out, and into log.cpp I include log.h and common.h, if I compile my file, guess what? I still get, if we were to resolve what the preprocessor actually did, you could see that it actually has included log twice. However, back in log.h, if we get rid of that comment and try and compile our file, we don't get an error, because it recognizes that log has already been included and it does not include. It's actually via an if def. So what we can do is we can actually type in an if and def, and then we can get it to check some kind of symbol, for example, log h. We're going to define log h, and then at the very end of our file, we're going to type in endif. So what this is going to do is first of all check to see if a symbol called log h is actually defined. If it's not defined, it's going to go ahead and include the following code in compilation. If this was defined, then none of this will be included. It'll be all disabled. So once we do pass this initial check, we're going to define log h, which basically means that next time we go through this code, it will be defined, so it will not be repeated. A really easy way to demonstrate this is just to copy and paste this entire file into our log CPP file. And then if we take a look at this, I'll also comment out log.h and common.h. So you can see over here that the first time, this is all fine. It includes the file and everything's okay. And then the second time, it's all grayed out. Because log h has already been done. We have this kind of discrepancy between include statements. Some include statements use quotes, some include statements use angular bracket h that was up one directory from this current log.cpp file. I could use ... to go back, and that would actually go back to a directory because this is relative to this current file. Whereas with angular brackets, they are never relative to this current file. They just have to be in one of the include directories. We'll talk more about setting up include directories and all that in the future. I don't want to complicate things too much, but that's basically the gist of how this works. One other thing that you might notice is this IO stream doesn't actually look like a file because it doesn't contain any extension. It's just called IO stream. What's up with that? Well, it actually is